shootout game that he's going to be chasing. If I like the more on passing yards, you bet your bottom dollar I like the more on rushing yards for Lamar Jackson. Cowboys versus Chargers in the late game, probably the premier late game at the 4 o'clock time slot if you're in the Eastern time zone. Obviously 3 o'clock Central on the West Coast. Have fun at 1. Now, Dak Prescott, holy moly, over 400 yards against a pretty solid Bucks defense. I don't see him slowing down. I'm taking more on Dak. That simple.
Same here, man. That was a display, I thought, by Dak. And it's a shame that Dallas didn't hold on and win that game. And the defense, couldn't hold up their end of the bargain. A defense that's now without DeMarcus Lawrence, by the way. So I think the rest of the way, Dallas is going to kind of have to win shootouts. I think that defense a year or two ago looked really good. Jalen Smith kind of turned out. Leighton Vander Esch came into his own, and we're like, all right, this Dallas team is pretty loaded, and the defense has completely fallen off. And they're basically running like a Dak Prescott air raid offense. And luckily they have an insane receiving core, and everybody seemed to play well, except Ezekiel Elliott, I guess, if you count him as part of that in week 1. I think that's just how they're going to have to go going forward. I mean, I think it's going to be high volume, Dak Prescott shootout type of games. The Chargers only put up 20 points in week 1. I think they go way over that.
They were also playing Washington.
Exactly. So. Exactly. Well, hey, I mean, look at the Giants put up what, 20-something, 29?
Yeah, that's true. Night? That's true. Danny Jones looked right. A lot better than Herbert did last week.
Daniel Vick. Yeah.
Vanilla Vick. Woo. Was that trending on Twitter? I love that.
I will be doing that as soon as the show ends. But yes, I'm with you on the more, Connor. I think Prescott has to throw the ball a ton, and I think he has the weapons that, easily push this over that number.
And on the other side, it's Justin Herbert. He had 337 yards last week against a pretty solid Washington defense. Well, what we think is a solid defense. We don't know what Danny Dimes did to them last night, but Jones looked pretty darn good. Herbert's thrown for over 300 yards in 8 of his 16 NFL starts. I think he makes it 9 against a Cowboys defense that you alluded to right off the top here of this little bit. They're not very strong, and they showed it last week. So I'm taking the more in what should be a shootout. Nick?
Yeah, same here. We saw, like you said, he put up a great performance against what we thought and still think is a pretty good Washington defense last week. Dallas gave up a ton of yards to Tom Brady. I mean, that turned into a shootout really on both ends. The Buccaneers only ran the ball 14 times in that game. So, I think this is a situation where I like the Chargers defense more than I like the Cowboys defense. But, it's going to be a back and forth game. I think both of these guys fairly easily eclipse 300 yards. I mean, maybe we'll be eating our words on this one when it's like a 10-7 game. But I think on paper, this is lining up as a shootout and really one of the most intriguing games of the week.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fun game. And from a fantasy point perspective, like if you have receivers in that game, buckle up, because that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And it's going to be a lot of fun just to be a part of it if you're playing along with Monkey Knife Fight, right? It's just fun to track and play along. But now we get into the really fun part. It is the touchdown dance. 513 winners. Pardon, I'm sorry if I just gave you tinnitus with that 500, but holy moly, 513 winners last week. All you need to do at home is select 3 players. If all 3 of your players score a touchdown on a minimum $5 entry, you're in to win. We'll start it off with the early slate of games, and we'll start it with Nick Whalen first. Nick, who do you like?
Man, Nick Chubb is the number one guy. Yeah, well, Chenault, obviously, but we've already covered him. But Nick Chubb is the guy who I probably trust the most. Just because he not only can break long ones, but we've talked about him, I think, going into week 1. But in addition to that, I mean, he's also their 20-yard and in back. He's their 10-yard and in back. He's their goal line back. They have Kareem Hunt as well. But last week it was, if we're getting down close to the goal line, we're handing the ball to Nick Chubb and nobody wants to tackle this guy. So, I mean, obviously, if you're choosing among the elite players, there's a ton of guys that you feel okay about. But Chubb's the guy I trust most, maybe not to have the most yardage, maybe not to do the Christian McCaffrey 75 and 75, but just to get into the end zone.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Another guy in that slate I like from New Orleans is Alvin Kamara. I mean, that guy just knows how to score touchdowns from out of the backfield. I remember last year, the very first touchdown dance I played with Monkey Knife Fight, it wasn't looking good, and Kamara went out and scored 2 touchdowns on Sunday Night Football and won it for me. And then, I mean, there's so many elite players to look at, guys that didn't get into the end zone last week. But Who are you looking at third? I mean, it's kind of hard to ignore Christian McCaffrey, isn't it?
Right. I mean, I think he's almost a given at this point. You mentioned Kamara as well. Kamara, Chubb, McCaffrey, they're the first three guys listed for a reason. I think you'd have to feel really, really good about any of them. Najee Harris is interesting. Like, obviously the numbers were not great, but a ton of volume. And I think that's pretty much what we expected. Like, they are going to pound this guy into the ground, even if it means he's carrying the ball 20 times for 35 yards. He's kind of the only option. And, Pittsburgh, it feels like every year, eventually they just fade into like the Ben Roethlisberger stand back, whip the ball around 50 times a game offense. But, it's the rare situation in the modern NFL where he's the guy and there's not really a clear number two. Like, it's not 2004 anymore where everybody has a back who could go for 1,500 yards. Everybody tries to split carries. You kind of try to have the third down guy. You have the pass catching guy. Like, Harris does everything for Pittsburgh. So I think coming off of a discouraging week one, in terms of fantasy, in terms of scoring, I think he bounces back.
I like that pick a lot. Yeah. I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head. When Pittsburgh goes into panic mode, Big Ben turns it on and they somehow just come out throwing the football in the fourth quarter and winning football games like we saw in Buffalo in week one. Moving into the late slate now, we got Arizona, Minnesota, Atlanta, Tampa Bay, Dallas, the Chargers, Tennessee Titans, Seattle, KC, and Baltimore. I mean, you can't tie. Oh, pardon me. That's the night game. Pardon me. So no KC, no Baltimore, but I'm just going to get right into it. You can't tie Derrick Henry down for another week. You just can't. The guy's going to eat this week. I don't care who he's playing against. Tennessee's going to go out and be like, okay, we need to run this football. We need to have success running this football, and we're going to keep running this football until we get that success. Nick, I like Derrick Henry to find the pay dirt this week. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think he can't possibly be as bad as he was last week, right? And that game got away from Tennessee. They might have been like the single worst team just in terms of aesthetics last week. Like, obviously Green Bay and the Jaguars were probably on that list as well, but Tennessee was fumbling the ball around. Like, Tannehill's getting sacked every other play. Julio Jones looked like this is like the first time he'd ever suited up with any of these guys. They just look completely incompetent, and that's kind of a nightmare recipe for a high volume running back. When you're playing from behind in a game where Arizona just keeps piling up points, and you're always like, basically your field position's terrible every time you're getting the ball. Like, that's not the recipe for Derrick Henry to just ground and pound, which is what you want him to do. I think they have to bounce back, right? There's no way they're going to play that poorly again this week. And a relatively appealing matchup, I think, against Seattle. Seattle looked good last week against Indianapolis, the Pacers. But I think Henry bounces back. No, I saw people saying like, well, the workload's finally catching up with him. Like, after week one of the season, come on, he'll be fine.
Yeah, I think he'll be all right.
Let's go. We love an overreaction.
Yeah, the week one overreaction takes are always my favorite, and then it's week two, things start to settle in. It's like, okay, maybe he isn't. Maybe he is slowing down. Maybe Tom Brady's getting old. Then week five comes around, and everybody's eating their words, and the Buccaneers are in the Super Bowl. I like Chris Carson as another pick there. He had 91 yards on the ground on 16 carries last week. He's taking on that Tennessee team, that Tennessee defense that looked like they were in shambles against Arizona. Edmonds ripped off some big runs. Kyler Murray was able to elude some sacks and rip the ball down the field for first downs against them. I don't like the way they look. You just said it. So I like Chris Carson. I mean, on a total of 19 touches, 117 yards, I think he can find the end zone this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I have no disagreement there at all. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott is also interesting. It kind of the same situation as Henry, where, I wouldn't say the game got away from Dallas. They led that game for most of it, but like we talked about, it turned into a shootout, and both teams just decided to abandon the run altogether. And they're just like, if we're going to win this game, it's going to take big chunk plays, and both teams got them. And eventually, Tampa Bay was able to win out on the field goal. But, I think that's a style that Dallas can play and has probably had to play more than they'd like. We mentioned last week, I mean, the stat where, like, when Dak plays, he's basically been like 400 plus yards every single week, dating back to last year before the injury. That's not necessarily sustainable. I think most head coaches would prefer to be more balanced. So I think we see an effort, at least, to get Ezekiel Elliott more involved this week. Whether that ultimately happens and the game gets away from them and they have to start passing again, who knows? But kind of in that same thinking with Derrick Henry, it's like, Zeke can't possibly be as bad as he was last week, right?
Yeah, no, he really can't. And then one player that I actually just want to note that's in the top three there that I don't feel comfortable with, and that I think a lot of people might just take, is Dalvin Cook. Yeah, I don't think Dalvin Cook is set to have that big primed week. We saw what Arizona's defense was able to do against a similar runner in Derrick Henry. If they're able to bottle up and contain Dalvin Cook, I mean, Kirk Cousins with the ball versus Kyler Murray with the ball, I think it could be a long day for Minnesota, and I don't see Dalvin Cook getting to pay dirt in that scenario, especially with J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones barreling down on him with the 5 sacks last week. So I'm staying away from Dalvin Cook. That's just a side note.
Dalvin Cook is so good that I don't feel super confident being like, don't start Dalvin Cook or,
well, I mean, there's just so many other, for the sake of the touchdown dance,
right.
In my opinion, there's just so many other picks out there that can score. The fact that Arizona's defense just literally punched Derrick Henry in the mouth, a guy that had 2,000 yards last season, is a huge statement for me, especially going in to play a team like Minnesota that is run first with Dalvin Cook.
No, for sure. I mean, you got to fade somebody. You can't say everybody's going to score touchdowns. So I understand that. I mean, in terms of receivers, I think DK Metcalf is a pretty solid play here. Obviously had a touchdown in week 1. He's just a complete monster. I don't know who in the Tennessee secondary, which is potentially one of the worst in the league right now. I don't know who slows him down. I mean, Mike Evans, kind of a slow week for him in week 1. It was kind of the Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin show for Tampa Bay, but you'd have to think Mike Evans gets more involved.
Yeah,
I mean, especially against a team like Atlanta, right?
That's
if you're going to get him involved, and he's the captain of your offense, he wears the C. It's a good time to do it, and especially he's sure-handed near the goal line. It's either him or Gronk that Brady's going to be looking to. So, I mean, and there's another pick that's just always eluding. They have 100 touchdowns together. Rob Gronkowski.
Right.
I mean, do I know he's going to get a touchdown? No, but at this time, 100 touchdowns with Tom Brady, it
seems like Brady goes out of his way to hit Gronk, right? And like, I can't prove this, but it's like, he's just like, I want to get this guy. It's like playing video games. You're like, I want to make sure that this guy gets 2 touchdowns this game.
It's like when you create your best friend and you're the quarterback.
Exactly.
It's like, we're going to break all the records together.
Nick,
I've definitely never done that.
I think it was a Rotowire guy who made the point. I could be wrong. Kelsey and Gronk are like 6 months apart in age. And the way that people talk about Travis Kelsey and the yardage that and his offense and everything that comes as a fantasy player is like a first round pick versus Gronk being like a 5th or 6th. There is a really interesting point there being made. I think it was a Rotowire person too.
I mean, if it was an interesting, great point, it had to be Rotowire. I don't know where else you get that kind of insight.
Well, moving on from the touchdown dance now, we've got Sunday night football in what should be a legitimate barn burner, folks. Remember that a minimum $5 entry is what you need to get in for that touchdown dance. Any of the touchdown dances, all 3 of them. Now getting into Sunday night football, Patrick Mahomes' line has moved. It was at 319 passing yards. Oh, no, it's still the same. And Lamar Jackson is still the same. Yeah, I think it's probably going to move up because of the fact it's Patrick Mahomes. We saw him throw for 337 last week. Baltimore has got a good defense, but bright lights, that guy knows how to perform outside of the Super Bowl against the Buccaneers. I think Patrick Mahomes goes for more yards on Sunday night football.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, he went over that total pretty easily last week. Kind of needed that long Tyreek Hill touchdown late in the game to end up going over, but a bit of a sluggish start for the Chiefs to that game. And that's kind of been their MO in some of these big games over the last couple of years. I feel like they've reached the Durant Warriors status where it's just like, it's probably really hard for them to get up for these like big regular season games. And, they
like going into the game, that you can win every game. You know that you have a shot in every game you play.
Right. It's like they almost are like just experimenting with different things for the first 3 quarters. And then they decide like, all right, I guess we'll just go win the game. And that's led to, I think everybody thought last year Mahomes was going to come out and throw for like 10,000 yards and like 70 touchdowns. And, the production was a little bit more muted. But I think a game like this, I mean, the Ravens have kind of emerged as like somewhat of a rival, I feel like, for the Chiefs in an NFL where there really aren't a ton of great modern rivalries. These teams seem to have played each of the last couple of years. It's always been a good game. The Chiefs have had their number. I think they go over. And I mean, this Ravens defense traditionally has been really good. I still think it will be really good, but I mean, they just gave up 435 yards to Derek Carr 4 days ago, right? So, I mean, for the Ravens, it's somewhat of a short week. It's it's not looking great for that Ravens secondary. If Derek Carr can carve you up when he's just throwing to one guy over and over and over, I would like to think Mahomes can do the same.
Yeah, and there's a lot more than just Darren Waller back there. There's Travis Kelce, there's Tyreek Hill, and then you have the depth of guys like Hardman and stuff on the outside. And then you have Edwards-Helaire in the backfield who can catch anything. So yeah, I like the more on that. Now here's an interesting one: 225 for Lamar Jackson. As I alluded to last week on Monday Night Football, he only threw for over 250 yards once all last season. He had 235 last week, so he did go for more last week. We thought he would on Monday Night Football, but this is going to be a tough one, and I think he's going to have to use his legs a lot. I think it is going to be a shootout, and I think the fact that the Ravens have proven that they're stressing the fact that they want Lamar to throw the ball, in the fact that in a game that I do in fact will see as a shootout, I'm going for more than 225 with Lamar Jackson. He's looked good. I think he's got a point to prove. It's tight. I wish the line was a little lower, but at 225, I'm going to take the more because it's the sexy play, and I want this to be a fun game.
I also want it to be a fun game. I think it will by default, just given the players we have. I don't think Lamar is going to fumble twice in 2 killer situations this time. But I'm gonna take the less here. He only went over this number 3 times last year, and 2 of those were in like massive blowouts against Cleveland and Jacksonville. The other one was in that loss to New England in Week 10. I think he goes under. I think with Jackson, you obviously want it to be a combination of the arm and the legs. We did see that last week. He had a great game, I thought, on the ground. I mean, for as many times as it felt like they got to him, and obviously a couple of key fumbles. There were so many times it was like 3rd and 8. You're like, all right, the Raiders just really need to get this stop here. And it looks like he's about to be sacked. And 2 seconds later, he's 15 yards upfield. It's unbelievable. I think he's able to be contained a little bit more through the air. I think last week was somewhat of an anomaly, having that many yards. What did he get to? 235 on 19 completions. That's a lot. That was a QB rating of almost 100. For as great as Lamar is, he's a former MVP. I am not a Lamar hater whatsoever. That game is somewhat of an outlier for him. I think we see a more traditional Lamar game where it's the legs first. I think he probably is right around 200 yards, but I don't think he gets to the 226.
Yeah, you know what? For me, I'm sticking with the more just because it's Kansas City, and I think he's going to be chasing, and I think those deep shots are going to have to be open. And then if they're not, watch this boy rumble. Jason, may you please pull up the other line here? We got one that's a lot of fun, folks. It's Lamar Jackson's rushing line. You don't see that too often from quarterbacks on Monkey Knife Fight. The line was at 72.5. There it is, holding sturdy at 72.5. And I think, as I said, a shootout game that he's going to be chasing. If I like the more on passing yards, you bet your bottom dollar I like the more on rushing yards for Lamar Jackson. If he gets outside the pocket, as Nick said, 2 seconds later, he's 15 yards upfield. Do that 4 or 5 times, and he's at the more, and I like the more.
Just going to add also that I think Lamar Jackson's like 6th or 7th highest projection of rushing yards on Monkey Knife Fight, and he is a quarterback, obviously, as we know, and obviously gets a lot done with his legs, but just an interesting – he's in the top 10 highest projected rushing yards.
Yeah, being in that top 12 highest projected rushing from any standpoint is huge, right? I mean, that's top dollar fantasy value. Yeah, so that's wild. That's coming from.
So that's Chenault value. I'm with you, Connor. I think you think Lamar's going to have a huge game through the air and on the ground. I think KC contains him on the ground. I don't think it's necessarily going to be huge through the air, but I think like that 225, 226, and then like 100 yards on the ground is something that's a massive game for anybody, but it's a game that he is going to need against a team like Kansas City to stay relevant and to stay in this game. Yeah, and like I said, I think they're able to kind of clamp down on that Ravens passing attack. I mean, you have 2 of your top 3 receivers are currently questionable for this game. It's not a stellar receiving core as is. Obviously, Rashad Bateman still not in the mix. But I think it's a little more feasible for Lamar to hit the over on this rushing total. Get to 73 yards. That's a number that he hit 6 times last year and was really close in a couple other games. He went for 83 rushing yards on 9 attempts against Kansas City last season. I think they're willing to live with, letting Lamar nickel and dime them on the ground, if that's an actual football term, in lieu of giving up the big play through the air. So I think the focus is, just don't let him scamper for 45 yards. But, if he picks up 11 or 12 here and there, that's okay. we just can't be letting him take the top off our defense and hit those long ones. So I'm going to go less on the passing and more on the rushing.
All right, there you hear it, folks. More on Lamar Jackson's rushing line from Rotowire's Nick Whalen. Well, we got Clyde Edwards-Helaire up here. We might as well break it down and give the people at home a full contest. I think in a game that the ball is going to be moving through the air a lot, I think he's going to be much more involved in the passing game. I think that his line overall, his net yards and his net touches could be a lot better than what he actually gets the ball handed off to him. I'm going to take less on the rushing yard line, but I still think he plays a major factor in this game.
I don't know where to go here. I mean, 53.5 is a really, really difficult line. I think it's kind of spot on. I mean, they
like Saquon's line last night, and then he got the 54, and I was like, thank goodness we did it.
Yeah,
we
right.
did it, guys. We did it.
And when he had that long one too, which scared me a little bit.
Well, that saved us.
Yeah. Edwards-Helaire, I mean, 14 carries last week for 43 yards. Not a super impressive YPC. I mean, nine yards was his longest rush in that game. I mean, if he gets that workload again, you know, if he's carrying the ball 14 or 15 times, I feel like he breaks one for even 15 yards, and all of a sudden, you know, you're basically a third of the way there. I think I'm going to go more. I haven't been overly impressed with Edwards-Helaire. I think I and a lot of other people expected more last season. He was banged up a little bit over the second half, and you know, maybe it just takes a little bit of time to adjust, but he hasn't been quite as dynamic as I think the Chiefs expected him to be. But this number is low enough. And honestly, I mean, the Ravens defense, again, like they got carved up by Derek Carr, but you know, they didn't do a great job, I didn't think, of containing you know, Josh Jacobs and even Kenyon Drake at times in that game. I mean, for a Raiders team that clearly wanted to throw the ball, they still gashed them a couple times on the ground. I'm going to go more here, a little bit more dissension this week, Connor.
Yeah, well, you know what? He only had 43 yards against Cleveland last week on the ground. And I think that's the big thing with him, is that he's the guy that's going to get the screen passes, and he's going to be going out for those flare passes out of the backfield. And that's where you want Helaire to be. You want Edwards-Helaire to have the ball in space, and that's where he's most effective. So I do agree with you on that, but I'm still riding with the less. Nick Whalen, wow, what a show that was. Any final thoughts on your Jaguars, your T-shirt train? What can we expect with the next T-shirts? Anything for the folks at home? Give them a little teaser.
Yeah, like I said, I'm out of T-shirts, so I don't have much on that front. I mean, like I said, I might have to dip into the Byron Leftwich jersey.
Allegedly,
week, but
we're allegedly out of T-shirts. We'll find out by Thursday.
Yeah, we'll see. I might have a shipment coming in of like Jaguars Super Bowl champion shirts that for some reason.
Well, I'm sure if we get the Jaguars Nation on the line here, I read a funny article earlier today that you would appreciate. Trevor Lawrence got over 10,000 wedding gifts from Jaguar fans.
What is he doing with those? Send them up here.
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Just donate them over to Monkey Knife Fight. Nick Whalen at Rotowire. Either way, we could use him on the show. Nick, thank you so much for joining us this week on Monkey Knife Fight Live. Folks, you can find him on Rotowire at Whalen with a 1 on Twitter. Folks, I'm Connor Rowntree. You can find me at Sports with Tree. And remember to hit it hard.